They were judged by their skin until one message changed everything. They paid for first class. They earned their seats. But one flight attendant decided they didn't belong. What she did next, a mistake she'd never recover from. Stay with me, because this story is about to take a turn no one saw coming. Welcome to Black Resilience. If you love powerful stories, hit like, subscribe, and let's dive in. The first-class cabin was designed to be an oasis of luxury, a place where the world outside ceased to exist, replaced by an atmosphere of effortless elegance. Plush leather seats gleamed under the warm ambient lighting, and the air carried a subtle mix of expensive cologne, freshly brewed coffee, and the faintest hint of citrus from the flight attendant's carefully curated fragrance. This was a realm of whispered conversations, where the elite sipped champagne from delicate crystal glasses and exchanged pleasantries over international business deals and exclusive vacation plans. Jonathan Carter, his wife Vanessa, and their 5-year-old son Noah were no strangers to this world. They had worked relentlessly to earn their place among the privileged few. Jonathan, a self-made entrepreneur, had built a multi-million-dollar real estate empire from the ground up. Vanessa, a former attorney turned philanthropist, had dedicated her time to education reform, ensuring underprivileged children had access to the resources they needed to succeed. Their success was not inherited, it was earned. Yet, despite all their achievements, they knew one undeniable truth: money did not shield them from judgment. As Jonathan smoothly lifted their designer luggage into the overhead compartment, his movements were precise, efficient. Years of traveling had turned this into second nature. Vanessa, ever graceful, helped Noah into his seat, her hands lingering on his tiny shoulders as she made sure he was comfortable. The little boy's eyes sparkled with excitement as she handed him a small toy airplane, a familiar companion for their many travels. To Noah, this was just another adventure, another plane ride, another destination to explore. But for Jonathan and Vanessa, it was yet another silent battle. They felt the stares before they even turned to acknowledge them, the quick assessing glances, the double takes, the fleeting expressions that flitted across the faces of other passengers before being masked by carefully curated indifference. Jonathan had seen it too many times before, the silent question in their eyes: do they really belong here? He knew the answer before it was ever spoken. Yes, their seats were paid for. Yes, they had every right to be here. No, they wouldn't be explaining themselves to anyone. Vanessa caught Jonathan's gaze and gave him a small, knowing smile, a silent reassurance, one they had exchanged many times before. Stay calm, we've done this before. And so they continued, as they always did. Jonathan settled into his seat, Vanessa adjusted the blanket over Noah's lap, and they prepared for the journey ahead. Then, Eleanor Hastings entered the scene. Eleanor was the epitome of a seasoned flight attendant, every hair in place, uniform crisp, posture exuding authority. Years of experience had made her an expert at reading passengers, anticipating their needs and, in her mind, identifying those who didn't quite fit. She moved through the cabin with a purpose, offering nods to familiar faces, exchanging pleasantries with high-profile passengers she recognized from previous flights. She had a mental checklist of who belonged and who didn't, and when her eyes landed on the Carters, her steps hesitated. It was subtle, just the briefest flicker of a pause before she continued forward. But Jonathan caught it immediately. He had developed an instinct for these things, an almost supernatural ability to recognize that moment when someone's brain processed him as an anomaly. It was never outright hostility. That was too obvious, too easy to call out. No, this was much more insidious, a hesitation, a narrowed gaze, a tightening of the lips as if mentally recalibrating an expectation. Eleanor approached their row with a practiced smile, but Jonathan saw the thinly veiled scrutiny behind it. "Good evening, sir," she said, her voice even, but slightly too polite. "May I see your boarding passes?" Jonathan didn't flinch. Without breaking eye contact, he reached into the breast pocket of his tailored blazer and pulled out the crisp, neatly folded boarding passes. He had been expecting this. Vanessa, ever the strategist, gently placed a hand on his knee, a silent reminder to stay composed. He handed over the passes without a word. Eleanor took them with a little too much intent, scanning them as if she were searching for a flaw, a discrepancy, or reason to challenge their presence. Jonathan watched as her eyes flickered between the tickets and her internal bias. She murmured, lips pressing together. First class. It wasn't a question, it was a statement wrapped in disbelief, as if the words themselves felt foreign coming out of her mouth. Yes, Jonathan replied, his voice calm but firm. First class. Eleanor's grip on the tickets tightened slightly before she forced a smile. I just need to verify something with the front desk, she said smoothly. Please remain seated. And just like that, she turned on her heel and walked away without another word. Jonathan exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. Vanessa leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. Do you think it's going to be a problem? Jonathan glanced at Noah, who was happily making his toy plane zoom through the air, blissfully unaware of the tension surrounding him. We'll see, Jonathan murmured. Vanessa's fingers curled around his. I hate that we always have to see. Jonathan simply nodded. Because this was never just a simple verification. This was a test, and he knew exactly how it was going to play out. Eleanor disappeared behind the curtain separating first class from the flight attendant service area. Her steps were purposeful, but Jonathan didn't miss the subtle tension in her movements, like she was trying to maintain professionalism while masking her hesitation. Vanessa, though outwardly composed, felt a storm brewing inside. This wasn't new to her. She had encountered this kind of silent discrimination before, at high-end restaurants and luxury boutiques, even at prestigious conferences where she spoke as an honored guest. It was never outright hostility, never anything explicit, but it was always there, an invisible wall, a subtle resistance that reminded her they were still being scrutinized. She glanced around the first-class cabin. Most passengers pretended not to notice. A middle-aged man in an expensive suit feigned interest in his laptop, but his eyes flickered toward them every so often. An older woman nearby furrowed her brow before looking away, as if reluctant to get involved. A young businessman in the front row casually scrolled through his phone, though Vanessa could tell he was listening more than he was reading. Her jaw tightened. She didn't need their sympathy. She turned to Jonathan, lowering her voice like a blade slicing through the tension. She's looking for a reason to get us out. Jonathan remained calm, but his eyes sharpened. I know. What if she doesn't find one? Vanessa asked, her voice turning cold. Jonathan exhaled slowly, a knowing smirk forming at the corner of his lips. Then she'll make one. Vanessa clenched his hand tighter. She didn't want Noah to witness this. What do we do? She whispered. Jonathan glanced at his son, still lost in his own world, joyfully flying his toy airplane through the air, unaware of the quiet battle being fought around him. We wait, Jonathan murmured, his voice low but resolute. But if she tries, I won't let it happen. The fire beneath his calm exterior wouldn't be easily extinguished. Behind the curtain, Eleanor moved briskly into the crew station. Her fingers curled around the phone as she dialed a direct line to flight control. Her voice was low, yet firm. I need to verify a first-class booking. On the other end, a corporate agent responded. Passenger name, please? Eleanor scanned the manifest on her tablet. Carter, Jonathan Carter. She bit her lip before speaking. The Carter family. A brief pause. Then, the Carter family? Their tickets were booked weeks in advance, fully confirmed. Is there an issue? Eleanor hesitated. The issue wasn't the tickets, but if she admitted that, she'd have no real reason to act. She needed a different approach. So she pivoted. They have a small child in first class, she said, carefully measuring her words. He may be disruptive to other passengers. There was another pause, this time longer. Then the agent's tone sharpened. Have there been any complaints? Eleanor swallowed. Not yet, she admitted reluctantly. The silence on the other end turned deafening. No complaints. No ticket issues. No reason to move them, the agent said, voice clipped. Let them be. Click. Eleanor stared at the phone, unmoving. She had expected to be right. Instead, she had no justification. Unless she created one. Eleanor took a deep breath, straightened her uniform, and marched back toward first class. Eleanor reappeared, a rehearsed smile plastered across her face. But Jonathan caught the tension in her eyes. She had found nothing, so now she would make something up. Apologies for the inconvenience, Eleanor began, her voice dripping with manufactured politeness. But there seems to be a slight issue with your reservation. Jonathan slowly looked up, calm, collected, but exuding quiet authority. What issue? He asked, his voice steady yet pointed. Eleanor averted her gaze. Our system flagged your booking for reallocation, she said smoothly. I'm afraid we'll have to move your family to a different section of the aircraft. Vanessa inhaled sharply, fury burning beneath her composed exterior. Reallocation? She repeated, disbelief laced in her voice. And who exactly made that decision? Eleanor struggled to keep her tone even. This is an automatic adjustment based on priority needs, she responded vaguely. Jonathan tilted his head slightly, studying her like a predator sizing up its prey. He knew she was lying. And he didn't have to say much to prove it. Jonathan simply let out a quiet sigh, then reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, typed a message. Seconds later, Eleanor's phone vibrated. She hesitated, checked the screen, and went pale. A message. From corporate, do not relocate Jonathan Carter. He is a major shareholder. Eleanor froze. Her fingers trembled slightly. She swallowed hard before slowly looking up at Jonathan. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. Jonathan had known from the start. He never needed to prove anything, but he let her expose herself. And now she would face the consequences. Eleanor stood paralyzed, her grip still tight around her phone. The message on her screen was an irreversible judgment. She had stepped into a battle she could not win, and only now did she realize the magnitude of her mistake. No one spoke. It was no longer Jonathan or Vanessa who were tense. Now Eleanor was the one being silently judged. She looked around, panic creeping in. The other passengers had been watching. Some pretended to be busy, heads tilted down, but their stolen glances betrayed them. Others, however, didn't bother hiding their stares anymore. Jonathan made no rush to speak. He sat back, calmly assessing the woman before him. His eyes were sharp but not angry. He didn't need rage. Reality had already crushed her. Eleanor tried to steady herself. Her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Mr. Carter, I didn't realize." Jonathan's head tilted slightly, curiosity laced in his tone. "Didn't realize what, Miss Hastings?" Eleanor opened her mouth, searching for words. She wanted to say she didn't know who he was, but even if that was true, it didn't matter, because deep down they both knew. She had looked at a family and assumed they didn't belong, and she had tried actively to remove them. She had no excuse. Her lips pressed together tightly. "It seems I made a mistake." Vanessa let out a short, humorless laugh. "A mistake?" she echoed, her voice sharp. "A calculated mistake, wasn't it?" Eleanor couldn't argue. She could feel the weight of the surrounding eyes pressing into her, suffocating her under the weight of her own actions. Jonathan finally leaned forward, his voice quiet but heavy with meaning. "Miss Hastings, I don't need your apology, but I do want you to think about something." Eleanor swallowed hard, trying to hold her posture, but the humiliation had already seeped into her bones. "What is that, sir?" Jonathan held her gaze, his next words deliberate. "If I weren't a shareholder in this airline, would you have been stopped?" Eleanor couldn't answer, because they both knew the truth. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin shifted. Passengers who had previously watched in silence now murmured among themselves, and this time, the whispers carried weight. "This is unacceptable," a man muttered, just loud enough for Eleanor to hear. He had a valid first-class ticket. His family wasn't doing anything wrong. A woman seated nearby nodded in agreement. "I've flown with this airline for years, but I've never seen a flight attendant act like this." Eleanor felt panic rise in her throat. She was losing control of the situation. Jonathan remained composed, but Vanessa saw an opportunity to escalate the moment. Slowly she unbuckled her seatbelt and rose to her feet, standing face to face with Eleanor. "Miss Hastings," Vanessa said, her voice sharp but calm. "We're used to this kind of thing. But this time, you chose the wrong people." Eleanor's breath hitched. "Do you have any idea what kind of consequences this will have?" Vanessa tilted her head slightly, her gaze exuding an undeniable presence of power. Jonathan, still seated, finally spoke, his voice cold yet patient. "Miss Hastings, I will make sure that you are held accountable." Eleanor's fingers trembled as she gripped the small towel tucked into her uniform. She knew it now. Her career was as good as over. At that moment, the flight captain, having received an urgent message from airline headquarters, entered the first-class cabin. She had been briefed on the situation, and as soon as she spotted Jonathan Carter, she realized the gravity of the mistake that had been made. Eleanor saw the captain approaching and knew her game was over. The captain scanned the room, her expression filled with concern and quiet dismay. "Mr. Carter," she said, her tone formal but urgent, "on behalf of the airline, I sincerely apologize for this incident. I assure you this will be handled accordingly." Jonathan didn't respond immediately. He let the silence linger, long enough for everyone in the cabin to feel just how serious this was. Then finally he nodded. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Then he turned to Eleanor. "Miss Hastings," Jonathan said, each word delivered with measured precision. "Do you have anything to say?" Eleanor pressed her lips together, knowing that any excuse would only make things worse. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. Jonathan didn't reply. He simply looked at her. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment. And that, Eleanor realized, was far worse. The flight captain took a deep breath before speaking again. "Miss Hastings, come with me, now." Eleanor had no choice. She lowered her head and walked out of the first-class cabin, knowing this would likely be the last flight of her career. The cabin grew quiet again. Jonathan adjusted his cufflinks, leaning back in his seat before glancing at Vanessa. Do you think she learned anything from this? He asked. Vanessa smirked, her expression thoughtful. Oh, she'll never forget it. Beside them, Noah was still lost in his little world, playing with his toy airplane, completely unaware of the storm that had just passed around him. Jonathan watched his son. Right now Noah was innocent to these struggles. But one day, he would have to face the world, a world where judgment could sometimes arrive before a greeting. But not today. Today Noah was just a little boy with a toy plane, and Jonathan would do everything in his power to keep it that way for as long as he could. The plane soared through the sky, carrying the Carter family toward a future they had earned. But what had happened on this flight would never be forgotten. And just like that, one message changed everything. But this story isn't just about one family being misjudged. It's about a reality that many face every single day, being judged before they even get a chance to prove they belong. Jonathan and Vanessa won this battle, but not everyone gets that chance. So here's the real question. If it were you, without power, without influence, would the outcome be the same? Do you think Eleanor truly regrets her actions? Will this lesson change how she treats others? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss more powerful stories like this. And remember, sometimes, one small action can change a life forever. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.